Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first Sharing Leading Practice event of the new academic year. For those of you who have not attended a Sharing Practice event before, they were formerly known as our Leadership Development Days, where schools with an accredited area of excellence share their best practice. A big positive to them now being virtual is that we're able to share them across the length and breadth of the country. We're really excited to have Matt Swain with us today. Matt is the Deputy Head of Step Ahead Teaching School Hub. Now, before I hand over to Matt, who'll be talking about achieving mastery in primary education, I just wanted to go over a few of our housekeeping rules. So thank you to those of you who have already introduced yourself in the chat. If you haven't done so already, please by saying what school you're from and if there's anything you'd particularly like to get out of today's session. There will be time throughout the presentation for questions, and I believe Matt has factored in time for a Q&A session towards the end of the morning, as well as a breakout group. Please do put any thoughts or comments in the chat for the wider group as we go along. If you could also remain muted during the presentation, as it prevents any background noise. If you do want to unmute yourself, just hover over the little microphone icon in the bottom left-hand corner. I also suggest putting your screens on speaker view, which is found in the top right-hand corner if you haven't done so already. If you also haven't done so, please do change your Zoom name to your first and last name, as it makes it much easier for us to record who has attended. Towards the end of the session, I will be posting a link to our feedback form, which would be great if you could please complete it. Feedback is really valuable to us and helps guide our future events. Finally, this session is being recorded, so if you do not want to feature, please do let me know. I will now stop sharing my screen and hand over to Matt. Thank you very much for leading today's session, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Morning, everybody. It's very nice to be invited to do a session today for you. Actually, I promised Mark McCall that I'd do it first for him and for the maths conference, so I'm not going to let him know I'm doing this because it's before the maths conference. And I didn't do it for research. I didn't do it for research. I had a different talk for that reason. But anyway, this is kind of the first time I'm going to talk about this. Sort of beyond, people visiting the schools. Hope you find it interesting today. Like that's kind of the idea, I suppose. So I'm just going to share my slides, and there'll be a couple of opportunities for you to break up and have a chat. I'll talk quite a lot. There's probably quite a lot to get through, and then we have lots of time for Q&A at the end. That's kind of useful to people. So I'm going to quickly share my slides, and hopefully this will work fine. Just so you know, I've just jumped out of. Is that working, Rebecca? You see like a front slide. Good stuff. So I've just jumped out of a mentor induction day for the new ECF. To jump into this, to jump back in later. I'll do my best to sort of to not ramble too much. So I'm going to talk to you today, I guess, in the next 50 minutes or so, about a sort of a model for mastery. Okay, so an approach to teaching and that we've applied to two like core hierarchical subjects in primary. So mathematics and phonics, like the teaching of the phonetic code. And I'm going to talk to you about sort of like why we did it, I suppose. What the model is, like what is the basic model for doing that in a school? What sort of climate do you require for it to kind of work? What does the sort of structure of the day look like, and the lesson look like? Assessment, because it's a really key part of this. The intervention itself, because this is all based around like a same-day intervention model, and finally, kind of what the impact is. And we'll have a couple of breakout rooms on the way through, just for you to reflect on some of the things I'm saying, and to have a chat about them. I'm not saying this is the best model for education. Okay, I'm not saying this is better than what you do. I'm just saying it's a different model for primary education. It's something that I believe is right for children, and the trust I work in believe is right for children. It's different to a normal model, but it's not that different. And actually, what I'll say, just to sort of frame this talk today, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So used to be a journalist. 10 years I was a magazine editor, actually. I used to edit a women's magazine. And then I became a teacher. And I started teaching in inner city London. So I was in Southwark to begin my career. Then moved to Wandsworth, where I became like I trained as an MAST, which is like a specialist maths teacher. And I was like a consultant for maths in Wandsworth, which is a really high performing mathematics borough. I think the highest performing back in the day. And so I trained teachers to teach maths, really. And that's when I started to really think about the typical primary model for teaching like mathematics. And then became a deputy head in Surrey. Was asked to be a head, didn't want to be a head, was much more interested in sort of teacher development, and moved to STEP Academy Trust, which is kind of a large primary MAT. There's about 20 schools in the MAT now, with a sort of mission to to improve the life chances of children, and with the belief that like where we can make a difference, we're kind of morally obliged to do so. So the schools we work with, schools that are usually in experiencing challenge and are always in challenging areas. Okay, so we've got schools in South London, from Southwark to Croydon, and then a huge set of schools in East Sussex as well. And yeah, when you think East Sussex, you probably don't think challenge, but one thing I've learned in the last 5 years is that sort of coastal deprivation has got to be the hardest, so almost the hardest demographic to encounter. Sort of the white coastal deprivation is a really, really challenging demographic for lots and lots of reasons, and all of our schools down here are sort of based in that area. So I joined the trust maybe 5 years ago as teaching and learning sort of lead for East Sussex, and the school had taken on a number of just taken on like a number of schools in East Sussex in one go. Like I think it's 6 in one go, because Lilac Sky, sort of another trust had kind of collapsed, and there were 6 schools in measures in a real mess, and the trust agreed to take them over, and I was kind of part of that team put together to improve these schools, which were all in sort of disarray. It wasn't necessarily teaching, and largely sat on the leadership, to be honest. But for whatever reasons, these schools were in measures, or they'd never been good. They just, like, they were stuck. And I was sort of part of this team that was put in that place to sort of just look at the teaching and learning, look at the curriculum, and make a difference and make an impact. Just to sort of, we'll come back to this at the end, but just so you know, all of those schools in the last 4 years are now good or outstanding. So they're either good with outstanding, or they're outstanding. And that's coming from a position of, in one school's case, like double special measures, which I don't think was a real thing you could do, but anyway, you can. So we've had that impact and we continue to do so. That's not like a bragging thing. I'm just trying to tell you that, like, it's important to understand the context I work in. And these schools are all different. They're all primary, but we've got like a growing, two growing schools, so that started in reception and they're growing, and now I think in year 4 they'll be, wouldn't they? Year 5. We've got 2 formentaries, 1 formentaries, and so on and so forth. So, and this model exists in all of them. So that's important to understand. Like, we applied this to all the primaries with it, no matter their size, no matter their staffing, and it's worked. Okay. I'm going to talk today to you about this in relation to mathematics, because that's where it's first started. But we apply exactly the same model to phonics. Okay, so teaching of the phonetic code, and the same model is applied to phonics throughout the school. So we teach phonics from reception till year 6. Okay, and obviously, beyond year 3 to 2, you were looking at the extended code, but we still teach phonics every day. Okay, so anything I say today about maths is equally applied to your teaching of reading and teaching phonics. So the point of the session really is to kind of go through these ideas and hopefully leave you a little bit sort of wise about maybe a different way of doing things. So I'll start by sort of talk about how I got here and how we got here, and why we made some changes. And one thing to consider is kind of this, right? So that's the percentage of children, if you take in the last 3 sets of stats results, that are not numerate at the end of primary school. No matter what schools put in place, 25% of children on average leave primary school without meeting expected standard, right? So, and I would say meeting expected standard is kind of like lifelong numeracy. So that's a sort of numeracy that can get you through life. It's you can calculate the percentages, you can work with fractions, you've got a strong grasp of the number. I think anyone in secondary is always a little bit amazed by what they can actually do in primary to meet that standard. But as a nation, we're sending a quarter of our children out of primary without that mathematical knowledge. And we're going to talk about whether that's a true figure in a second. But at a national level, we're failing children. That's not right. That's 25% is too big a percentage. Okay, it's not what the best mathematical education systems in the world are doing. They're not sending out a quarter of their children not numerate, but we are. Okay, so that's the one thing to consider, and that's a problem, especially when you look at the impact of not being numerate on later life. Right. So interestingly, the percentage, the difference, the sort of financial difference between being numerate and not numerate, if you're talking about sort of your income, your expenditure, is also 25%. So if you're not numerate, then you'll be 25% worse off than people that are. And there are a number of reasons for that. The most obvious one is that that you may not have the skills to do certain jobs, and most jobs require basic level of numeracy. But also, you make bad decisions. You just make poor decisions financially. You pick the wrong mortgage. You get the wrong credit card. And so on and so forth. One thing worth noting here is that we spend a lot of time, and quite rightly, talking about reading in primary school and the importance of reading, and it obviously is the gateway to knowledge, and it is incredibly important. But if you look at the impact of illiteracy against a lack of numeracy, then actually a lack of numeracy has a greater negative impact on girls than illiteracy does. Okay, so does Numeracy Matter report, and then does Numeracy Still Matter report cited that females were that weren't numerate were more affected than if they weren't literate. Okay, so numeracy really matters. It really matters to girls. And then let's go back to this 25%. Our job, right, as teachers, fundamentally, is to remove disadvantage, right? So it's to ensure that those children, and more than anything else, that we teach that experience disadvantage, don't do that. We level the playing field. We give them as good a chance as everybody else. But that 25% is almost always a disadvantage. That 20% of children that fail are nearly always your pupil premium children. We look at that category, and we look at that demo who sits in that 25%, that's who it is. So fundamentally, we're failing the one group of people we're meant to be working with and thinking about. Now, I've got real problems with that. That's not right, is it? The 75% of children are making it through, but most of them would have made it through anyway. But the ones we really should have focused on aren't getting there, and we're not making the difference we should as a nation. Okay, and there's a reason for that, and one of the reasons for that is this sort of elephant in the room, which is we have a national curriculum which pushes people through it, whether they understand it or not. Okay, we have schemes of work which set out lesson by lesson what children must learn in that lesson, in that hour. That's got to be a ridiculous serendipity for anything you ever teach in mathematics. Be taught in an hour to all children, but we expect that of them. Every lesson's an hour, and every lesson learns something new. And so we stick them on this conveyor belt of a curriculum. And we stick them on this conveyor belt curriculum in year one. And no matter what happens, they just keep on moving. No matter what they understand or don't understand, lesson 7, term 2 in year 5 is going to be on fractions, and finding fractions of an amount. Whether you've lost the grip of fractions in year 3 or not, because that's the national curriculum. Interestingly, if you look at the most successful sort of nations of mathematics, then the curriculum is nowhere near as gigantic as ours, and it's far more time spent. We've got this curriculum, we sort of push them through it, and not surprised at the end of it, 25% of them can't actually do it. And we try and help, we try and do something about this, but we never do enough. So here's what happens. By year 6, the attainment gap between the most fastest graspers and lowest graspers is 7 years. And taught year 6 knows that's true. And we've let that gap be created over time. So we're faced with a year 6 class where some children have no grasp of place value, whereas other children can tackle percentages and the area of a circle. Yeah, it's just absolutely bonkers, like the spectrum you're creating by year 6. And then what we do as schools is we start to panic a bit, because actually our data does matter, and even in the new framework it still kind of matters. Outcomes matter for children, and so we don't pay enough attention to it early on. But in a reactive kind of manner, what we do is at the end of year 2, at the end of year 6, and maybe even in year 5, we start to panic. We start to sort of like intervene, and we look at those children that are way off the mark, and we start pulling them out of lessons and giving them more maths. We use reactive intervention to try and bridge a gap that's too big to bridge. And this, when I did my MST, I did my sort of master's in primary mathematics. One of the things I did a project around intervention in year 6, and the point of the project was to look at an intervention sort of program and to evaluate it. And my entire project completely changed when I started interviewing children. So have you ever spoke to children who spend half their life in intervention in year 6 to catch them up, to push them through the SATs? They couldn't be sadder. They spend, some of them in some schools, less than half their week in a classroom with their friends. They miss history, they miss geography, they miss art, they miss their favourite lesson PE, the thing they're good at, because they're doing extra maths. And they're doing it in corridors or rooms without whiteboards or without enough resources, and often being taught by people who aren't trained teachers. And we willingly do this. We disenfranchise children in the most important transitional years of their primary education, because we kind of realise they're not going to make the expected standard. And we also realise the only way they're going to even have a chance of making the expected standard is if we spend more time doing maths with them. So we recognise that some children need more time than others to learn things, but we only give them that time or take that time off them when the gaps are too big. Like Doug Lamothe said, like snowballs are expensive. Like the longer that gap's left to form, the bigger the gap becomes, the bigger the problem. And we get to year 5, year 6, or year 2, and we try and close the gap in our best efforts. And if we do, it's at the cost of their wider curriculum, and it's at the cost of their sense of being part of a group. And we celebrate, we push them over the line, they made the expected standard. But deep down, anyone with a conscience knows they don't really know that maths. Because that's not how learning works. The way learning works is that we perform something, and then we have to do it over time, over a long period of time, to be able to retain it and do it and call it knowledge. But if you're cramming children months before a test on 1,000 different topics, they may just perform it in that test. You may just get your percentages up to 90%. But all those children whose time you've taken off them, whether they're in corridors or booster groups, or or if you're just adding extra math to a timetable, they'll do it in a test if you're lucky. They don't know it. We know that. Everyone knows that. Because it wasn't knowledge, it will be forgotten. They haven't known it long enough. They haven't practiced it enough for it to be knowledge. And so although we sit comfortably and tell ourselves we made a difference and that we got 90% of the expected standard, I can guarantee you that a large percentage of those in this model don't actually know that mathematics. And if you ask them 3 minutes later, they're no better at percentages than they were before they start getting boosted. And so I wasn't, and over time I've unpicked this from what it does to children, to the integrity in the percentages, to the group that it impacts, and just kind of felt that it doesn't sit right with me, how we do this. And maybe there's a different way to do this, right? That's kind of what I thought. So before I sort of talk about that and talk about what we did, I ask you just to pop into breakout rooms for a second. Now, I know we're all going to walk in there. We'll be, and no one's going to want to say they're really, really good at mathematics, and that their mathematics isn't, what it should be. But I'd like to just have a reflection on what I've said. Like, reflect on boosters and last-minute interventions and the integrity of those percentages that we produce at the end of year 6 and year 2. And just have a talk about whether any of this resonates. It's okay if it doesn't, and maybe just be my experiences, my lived experiences in schools. I've worked in a lot of schools and done a lot of mathematics with a lot of people. But I'd just like to think on that for a second. So, on national curriculum and the problems with that, on the gaps that appear, on how we try and plug them, on whether we do really plug them. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes in breakout rooms, if that's okay, Rebecca. Then I'm going to come back and just take people's reflections, if that's okay. Anyway, welcome back. So thanks for having a little chat about that. I'm just going to ask people, before I sort of rattling on again, any sort of reflections on what I have to say. It may, it's perfectly well, welcome to disagree with me. Right, but just on some of the things I've talked about. Anybody want anything? Just, I'm not going to cold call because that's a bit brutal this time in the morning. But please just unmic and give us some reflections if you can. Or yeah.
Hi, the people in my group were saying we do agree with you. We feel like there is the children that could really be enriched by that area of the curriculum where they can thrive. Quite often that can happen where there is this need to get children, like you said, like over the line. And I feel like that top-down pressure does affect that a little bit. But I think, as practitioners, we need to think more creatively about how we can support those children in a way that isn't narrowing the curriculum for them, so they have an enjoyment of school. They don't see school as just a constant throng of intervention to get them there.
Yeah, I think that's so much. I think that's that's something I've really thought about. Like, I've got children of my own. I've got like both in primary, like year 5 and year 1, year boy and year 1. And I'm really mindful of that. Like, I think we've all been like directed to look at the curriculum now, as we should have been. And I think it's like they've got a right to like a proper curriculum, haven't they? And we take it off them. In schools, we take it off them. And I think there's this idea of, like, as you said, like getting them over the line. And I think that's language, that's metaphorical language is used, by most school leaders in most schools. But that's it should be about like them learning to do maths and knowing maths, shouldn't it? And knowing like the line's kind of a school thing, like getting those numbers up. Francis, go on.
Yeah, we were saying that we've really welcomed the government's Ready to Progress document. That's been really useful. And the NCTM's prioritisation document that we've actually been using in schools and our schools. And Debbie Morgan's mantra, slow down to go fast, which is actually really important. So we don't want teachers to be rushing ahead. But I am conscious, as I am looking at different groupings, that we're back in the window where we will be doing SATs and there will be pressure on us to get the results. And I am concerned a little bit about our year 6 teachers and our year 2 teachers, the pressure for them to race through the curriculum. We have been on a journey with mastery and we like it. We find the challenges of the previous need to differentiate 100 ways, sort of like that's missing, and there's a bit of pressure. We understand about manipulatives and everything, but we are still accountable for these SATs results, and we're back in the window. I'm hoping, as one of the school leaders, that the government will be kind.
Well, if I can reassure you, we've had 3 schools with this model go through the new framework, and have all come out with good and outstanding. So, same for leadership and everyone.
Yes,
so,
we did as well.
Anything I'm doing today, as has been seen by Ofsted in both frameworks. And so I just want to sort of like, that's what Couch was saying with that. I think you make a really good point there with sort of mastery. We'll talk about mastery in a second, because we have to kind of define mastery a little bit. And Debbie Morgan's absolutely right. The danger, isn't it, with that is that you can hide poor teaching in you can take as long as you want to teach stuff. So on one hand, it can be, that's great, because we'll take our time on each idea and we go in small steps. On the other hand, it's also a bit, it can also just hide bad lessons, so it took a long time just because the lessons weren't very good, like the assessment wasn't good enough, and that's one of the dangers. And then you also get this problem in year 6, year 5, where they haven't got to where you want to get to. So hopefully what I'm going to try and give today is an answer to that, really. So I think it's perfectly possible to do all this without worrying in year 6. I've got Cindy, can I come to you, then I'm going to crack on.
Yeah, very quickly. What we're trying to push is not to have these huge intervention groups like you were talking about, because we're not embedding learning in any form. We are looking at short, sharp interventions, so that any child who has not understood the lesson, within that day, at some point there's a very short, sharp intervention taking place, so that the child's ready for the lesson the next day.
You're at the right talk then, Cindy. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So so it's useful to you. Well, I'm going to crack on with some more slides. We'll chat again later, if that's okay for everybody. So I was going to talk about sort of like I guess the model, really. So first of all, I want to establish talk about mastery, because I want to make sure we're not getting confused on language here. So I'm going to talk what mastery is and what it isn't. Okay. So when we talk about mastery in mathematics, or mastery in any respect, but let's talk about in maths for now. Here's 3 things it definitely isn't, right? So mastery is not a scheme of work. Like, just because we use mathematics mastery in a school does not mean we have a mastery approach to maths. That's the brand name of the scheme of work. Okay, you're not doing mastery because you do mathematics mastery. That's just, that's not true. Mastery is not mixed ability classes. We're doing mastery because we put them all together and we give them all the same work. Okay, that doesn't mean you've got a mastery approach to anything. It just means you've got mixed ability kids trying to do the same work, and it's not about manipulatives. So often, the biggest sort of, like, for most people, mathematics mastery is we get the deans out. Now, good maths teaching involves manipulatives, but that's and the education systems that have deliver a real mastery model for mathematics often use manipulatives, sort of Shanghai being the best example, but manipulatives aren't mastery. They're just an element of really good maths teaching. So it's not a scheme of work you buy. So you can't say do mastery just because we do mathematics mastery scheme of work, or White Rose mastery scheme of work. Doesn't makes no difference. It's a name or something. Just because you put all your kids in one class and have them do the same work doesn't make it mastery. And because we get the deans out, doesn't make it mastery. Mastery is this, I would define it as this, and I think Mark McCall would probably agree. So the mastery model is believing that all children are capable of understanding everything you teach. Let's take out the 5% of children that, for SEND reasons, can't do that. We have to take that out of this equation. But for 95% of children, they are capable of understanding the things you teach them. But they will not all grasp every single thing you teach them in the same period of time. Like, we know that, or else there wouldn't be booster interventions, which is giving them extra time to learn the thing they couldn't learn before. Like, we've always grasped that, or we wouldn't give them more time. But it's understanding that from the outset. So if I know, and I believe that all these children in my class and all these children in my school can understand every bit of mathematics I teach them, but some will take longer than others, what I should probably do is come up with a model that provides more time for the children that need it each day. And then what we'll get is mastery. Then what you get is everybody understanding everything before they move on. Now, mathematics is like a hierarchical subject. If you don't get lesson 1, you're not going to learn lesson 2. And if you don't get lesson 2, you won't learn lesson 3 and 4 and 5. each lesson is built on the one before. So it's really, really important that if we recognise that some children take longer to understand an idea, that we make sure they understand that idea before we move to the next one. But it's not traditionally what we did. We went, we're doing mastery, get them all mixed with the classes. We'll give you all the same work, we'll get the deans out, but tomorrow we get to the next lesson and still 6 of you didn't get yesterday's because we gave you all an hour to get it, despite the fact you needed 70 minutes. So here's basically what we did. And this is not all of it, but this is fundamentally how it, operational level, what it looks like. We teach maths every day, first thing in the morning for an hour, and after maths is assembly. And assembly is 20 minutes long. And for those children that need longer to understand the idea that day, they stay with the teacher and continue to learn. That's it, and it happens every single day. So for any child in that class, the maths lesson that day can be as long as 80 minutes. If that's what they require to understand that step in learning. Now, I would say if you get the step in learning small enough, and my experience is that's enough time for everybody to get everything. So in all of our schools in East Sussex, they come in, they do mathematics for an hour, they're taught a new idea, a new bit of learning built on the one before. And for those that aren't quite secure, after the 60 minutes, they spend a further 20 minutes, up to a further 20 minutes with the class teacher. And then they're all secure. And then when you get the next day, everyone's ready to start on the next step. It's no more complicated than that. And obviously, what people are going to say here is, well, you're still taking time off them. Yes, we are. But we're getting ahead of the problem. So here's something you learn. If you close the small gaps when they appear, you don't get these massive gaps at the end that you can't unpick. So a child who you might take most of their afternoons off in year 6, let's say 60 hours of wider curriculum, if you'd intervened earlier, wouldn't have needed 60 hours of intervention. We never get children to the same day keeping session every day, and we never know which children are going to need it. But what we do know is if they come one day, they don't generally come for the next week or so. And what we found out, so the way it kind of works is the two basic fundamentals. Like when you talk about this, I want to talk about this today. There's what you should be tight about and what you should be loose about. There's lots of things. It doesn't matter where your maths lesson is today. I'd say first team's quite good. It doesn't matter what comes. It doesn't matter. Whether maths and assembly sit right. That doesn't really matter. Or whether after maths you have the daily mile, and that's the thing that they do their intervention. That you can be loose about that. What you need to do though is make sure that the keep-up session is run by the teacher who taught the maths, not by anybody else, and it happens on the same day. It doesn't have to be directly afterwards. That's ideal for us, but it doesn't happen on the same. But so if I was thinking about at my school, well, we can't quite do this. You don't have to do all of this. What you should do is have a 20-minute keep-up session on the same day as your maths, run by a teacher, and the same for phonics. We do exactly the same for phonics. I won't get into that now. That's it. At a basic level, that's what we do. I'm now going to unpick what that looks like and what needs to be in place first of all for that to happen. So first of all, none of this will work without the right climate in your schools. And these are 3 sort of basics you want in place. Number 1, everybody's got to believe that this is the thing you should do, that this is how you will better develop mathematicians and readers in your school when you apply to phonics. They've got to believe in this approach to mastery because it takes massive amounts of effort on everybody's part to do it. They've got to subscribe to that vision. You've got to have an SLT and members of the non-teachers who are going to do the heavy lifting. Because whilst our teachers working with 3 or 4 children straight from maths lesson, somebody else has transitioned the rest of the class to an assembly. And a member of the leadership team every day is running that assembly without any teachers in there. Like, this is a commitment from everyone to make this work. And finally, you need a sort of climate in your classroom where children are willing to tell you when they're wrong. You need to create and foster a supportive climate in your classroom where children see mistakes and misunderstandings and misconceptions as important steps on their journey to becoming knowledgeable. So they need to be in place first. So what does this kind of look like then? So what we've got every day is a maths lesson followed by an extra 20 minutes of keep up. But this only really works if the lesson works in identifying where the problems are in the first place. So there's a really basic model, which I'm sure you're familiar with, of teaching, of instructing mathematics. And what I'm not talking about today is like non-routine problem solving. We look at problem solving and non-routine problems in a very different structure. So I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about just standard mathematics lessons, like small step each session, okay? So anything we teach, like the teacher teaches it, they show them how to do it, the teacher spends time doing them with the children at whole class level, and when they're successful, the children do some independent practice. That's the basic structure of introducing any new idea. Okay. And here's kind of the ratio of that. So the instruction part, the modeling is quite short because it's a small idea, and we may model it 3 or 4 times. The point in which the teacher's doing some with the children is incredibly long, because this is where we're checking, we're using our examples to pluck out those misconceptions to make sure that when we get them to be independent, that they're able to successfully do it. And then there's a quite substantial period of practice. So if you look at ratio, it's kind of like 1:3:2. And then following that is that keep up for those that need it. So I'm going to take you through this in more detail because I think it's the bit people need to get their heads around. So the I stage, we only use worked examples. Okay. Read this quickly for me. And the way we use them is this. So the teacher models how to do the thing they're going to do. And they model it like this with this version of worked example. So we've got here 1 1/4, subtract 3/4. Okay, so the teacher will, and we use what's called like step-by-step worked examples. So typically a worked example is like you do it in front of them, and then what they're left with really to look at is a solution. So what we've moved towards is like providing a sort of instructional guide. So let's imagine I was doing this. I'd write the problem, the equation, and then I'd show my first step. So I'd work across the board this way. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn my mixed fraction into 2 fractions. So my whole is 4/4, so that's the first thing I'm going to do. So I'll model that stage. Then I'd add those 2 fractions to get an improper fraction. I'd talk this through and I model that stage. Then I complete the subtraction. Actually, probably in this case, I simplify it. And we do that 2 or 3 times for different examples. And that goes on a flip chart, and it's there for children to look at all times. And as you can see, this is very different from doing it in one go, just where the only thing they're left with is this. Now, there's a clear example of how to do the thing we're going to teach them. And then we do lots and lots of examples with them. Okay, and so here's an example on the board. I'll do 1, you do some. I'll do 1, you do some. And we make sure these examples touch and push for all those misconceptions. And what we're looking for when we we get them to work independently is when we want to hand that baton is when they're secure enough, we think, to be able to continue to do this correctly. And when we're doing this, when we're working, for instance, the we section of a lesson, we use what are called problem pairs. So we do them on the left. We talk it through, and then they, to begin with, going backwards on, do the one on the right with their partners. And we do lots of those. So they're working in partnerships. And then we do the same, but now they're working independently. This is all within the we do section. And we're constantly checking for understanding, constantly checking for errors, misconceptions, so we can start to intervene, not in the catch up or keep up section, we intervene early. That 20 minutes is extra. It's not like we don't start intervening with children who don't understand it. Then we intervene when we start to pick the misconceptions out. Just an example of obviously it's and when we get to like the weedy section, when I'm doing some on the board in these pairs, they're doing one, we do lots and lots of loads, for like 15 minutes. And when there are problems, we'll unpick them and go over them. And when about 80% of the class are showing like consistent success, we move them onto their independent work. And at this point, for those that aren't, we begin to work with them. We begin to intervene whilst the others get on with their practice. And those practicing work silently and do a substantial amount of practice in the thing they've just learned. Enough to sort of like create that path through the field. That the more they practice, the more defined that knowledge is, the less likely they are to get it wrong. Basically, it's that phrase now. You get them to practice till they can't get it wrong. Not practice till they get it right, practice till they can't get it wrong. And while that's happening, while they're having that necessary practice, we're starting to unpick some of the challenges for those that are taking a bit longer. And we're working with them. Eventually, we'll come back and mark these guys. And the guys we're working with have a go to work independently. And when 8% of the class have shown they can do it independently, we move on and take them a bit deeper. But at any point in this process, if it's not sticking, if our teaching hasn't worked, we go back a step. So that's kind of the lesson. Right? But underneath this is, because this kind of question is like, how do you do this? How do you get everybody together? Underneath it is some really forensic assessment. There's a really beautiful analogy that came from Tom Sherrington. I love this analogy. It's a really good one. He says, like, checking for understanding is like the most important thing we do, right? So, and if you're talking about investing your school's time into a same-day intervention model, you've got to make sure you use that intervention time wisely, and you only use that wisely if you actually know what people need help with. And Sherrington says, and it's a lovely analogy, like if you were going to teach 30 children to abseil, you wouldn't model how to put the harness on. Ask them to put their harnesses on and then only check 2 of them before you sent them over the cliff. And so one thing we have to understand is this. No one child is a proxy for any other child's learning. So any checking for understanding should be of the whole class, of every child at every point in their learning. And I would say in most classrooms that simply isn't the case. And so we don't really know who knows what at any one point in the lesson. What I'm going to talk to you about now is a forensic level of formative assessment that enables our teachers to intervene at the point of error and focus on the error that needs unpicking and give those children the maximum amount of support they need to get them where they need to be. And after that, I ask you to reflect yourselves as leaders or as heads or as teachers as to whether you currently have this level of assessment. So we have like 4 key assessment points in our teaching. So we assess here, we assess every child when they're working with partners in the we do phase, using think, pair, share. I'm going to talk to you about that in a second, because I think think, pair, share is often mostly used badly. We then assess every child again as they move to being more independent in a section, using their show me boards. We then assess them again during their independent work. We mark every single child in the lesson using something called error tracking. And then at the end of the session, we assess them again using like hinge point multiple choice questions. All of this gives us data, a constant flow of data about every single child, so that once we begin intervening, we're intervening effectively, and that this time that we are putting lots of school resources into working is used intelligently. I'm going to take you through those 4 now, just to talk you through them. But before I do, actually, I'm going to talk you through them first. I'm going to ask you to reflect on them. Okay, let's talk about think, pair, share. So think, pair, share is something people check out all the time in classrooms, and in my experience, most of the time it happens like this. I ask a question, what's 7 cubed? And then I say, okay, think about it. Probably don't give you time to do that. Talk to your partner, and then share it with the class. Think, press, share. And once I've done that, I listen to 2 children. So all I've learned is about the understanding of 2 children, maybe 4 if they're in pairs. The teacher, during Think, Pair, Share, invariably stands at the front of the class, not really doing a great deal. What you should do during Think, Pair, Share is walk around the class and listen to their discussions. Don't interrupt, listen. Plan a route around the class. We'll talk about routes around the classroom in a minute. Have a clear route around the class and walk around there. Every time you ask a question and they do it and explain to their partner, walk the room and listen to what they're doing and what they're saying. And be ready to unpick the things you hear that maybe you're picking straight away. Otherwise, don't bother doing anything Pair Share, because really you're just hearing from 2 children, 4 children. Either you know what everybody's thinking, or you don't. So you listen, and then immediately you start to respond to what you're hearing, any challenges that are coming up. Then, as in that we section, we're comfortable moving to working on just on their own, not their partner now. And we'll give them a problem pair. We'll do one, they'll do one, and we'll get them to show me their work on the boards. And again, this is almost always done badly, right? So we go, okay, show me, and then one kid puts his board up. We put it up early. The kids that don't know it copy the answer, and you get a sea of boards that no one really reads because you've got 30 boards. None of that should be how it happens. When you have show me boards, you get them in tables or rows to work like this. So back row, boards up, all at once. You establish this routine. Middle row, so back row down, middle row up, middle row down, front row up, and you read every board. And you chuck examples on. And, one really key part of the reading section, which is almost always skipped in lessons, is like lots of varied examples. Don't shy away from the ones they're going to get wrong. Like you want to shy. So here's a really nice example. Like if you look at how children assess to whether they can tell the time in a SATs paper, no one ever asks them to read a clock that says 3:15 or 3:20, because everybody would get that right. The assessment question for whether you can read time to the nearest minute is always 11:55, because if children can't do that, they'll always write like 5 to 12. So that's where you need to give them, you give them the hard ones. And they show me boards, show me boards, show me boards, and you're constantly reading everybody's understanding, and you're addressing those misconceptions as they appear. And if there's a really common one, you reteach. You maybe go back to the we section. It doesn't matter, just like lots of forensic data. And we're then starting to, and then we move most of them on. We're looking at showing them to be like, successful. We move them to working independently. And we're then now working with those first few that are, that are still struggling a little bit. We start to give them that extra time. And then we do what's called error tracking. This is like something I'd encourage all schools to do. We started doing it like 2.5 years ago. One thing we looked at was how effective our sort of like marking of mathematics was, and how we looked at what's happening in the classrooms. And so generally when you mark, number one, like marking of maths needs to be when they do it wrong. It's no point doing it after lesson. It's too late, isn't it? You're about to teach them something else then. Like you have to mark maths in the lesson. It should be part of your lesson. But the problem with marking maths, if you're a teacher, is you walk around, you mark the first one, you mark the second one, you get to the third child, they're stuck, you sit there, you try and help them, 10 minutes goes by, you have to get to the front of the classroom again, and you don't see anybody else. So we use what's called error tracking, which is a much more efficient way of doing this. And there's some simple sort of rules to error tracking and marking effectively. Because what we're always looking to do is to check every child, isn't it, right? So you need to mark every child at stage. So all this involves is when you've got a set of tasks for children, you make it really clear where they put their answer. If you think about marking SATs papers, it's really obvious where you put the answer. So the reason that is it means they're quick to mark. So you make it really clear where the answer goes. So when you're marking them, you can find it and answer it quickly. You then have a copy of the task sheet, and you write the answers on them on your version. And you walk on the class and you mark, and where there's a problem, you make a note on your sheet. and you just keep going, you don't stop. Because what you are going to do is when you've marked everybody, which you can do in 2 laps in about 3 minutes, you're going to go to the front of the class and you're going to address what you see as being the problems. So instead of just helping one child, you help all the children that need it in the areas they need it. It's beyond efficient, and it's forensic in its level of like checking for understanding. And then finally, and I'll leave this for now. Finally, at the end of the lesson, often in a lesson, and you'll find if you do this, children, like they're successful, that you show them it, they do it together, they do it independently, they're really successful, and then you take them deeper, don't you? You take their understanding deeper in that session, and often by the end, because you're taking them deeper, it gets more challenging. They start making mistakes, right? And that's fine, because that's maths. But self-efficacy, like, is a really big deal in motivation in learning, right? So knowing that I'm successful makes me want to be successful again. And as things get more challenging, that feeling of success that a child experienced doing the new thing you've taught starts to evaporate because it's got more difficult now. But all we should really care about is understanding the main thing we taught, the main idea. So at the end of the lesson, every lesson ends with a hinge point question. So a hinge point multiple choice question is like a multiple choice question with 4 answers based on the main thing we taught them, where the wrong answers will tell us what the misconceptions are. So in that example of like telling the time, we could have a clock face that says 11:55, and the correct answer would be 11:55. That might be B. A might be 12:55. C might be, I'm trying to think now, 11:50. So, the error is going to help address the misconception. What this hinge point question does, and it's part of the suite of assessments, is it reminds the kids they could do the thing we first taught them. That's really nice. It reminds us of who could do what we first taught them. But it also helps us again drill down to any errors that have crept back in. So you've got this forensic, like, non-stop barrage of checking for understanding. I'm just going to stop there for a second. And whoops, like that. I'll stop sharing. I'm going to ask you just to put you back in breakout rooms for a second. And I want you to just talk to the people in the room about whether you can say hand on heart that at any point in a maths lesson, your teachers or you know what everybody knows at all periods in the teaching. Is your assessment fit for purpose? Because the only way to assess in maths is to assess everybody. So I'm actually just putting you in break rooms a second. I want you to reflect on what are your current sort of like formative assessment strategies in class. Okay, and are they good enough to identify the misconceptions? I won't take feedback on this one. I just want you to have a chat and reflect. Because we worked really hard on making this forensic and like really, really valuable. But it's been a long journey. But I think that's kind of where we are now. Because you have to be if you're going to try and close the gaps. So I'm going to ask this is the last breakout room. So Rebecca, if you could pop in for like about 2-3 minutes. I want you to think about checking for understanding of mathematics. Is your marking happening in the lesson? Where and how are you checking what children understand? And what are you doing with that? And are you checking every child all the time? Okay, Rebecca, if you just give people like 3 minutes in breakout rooms, have a chat about that. That'd be good. Come back, everyone. I won't be sort of soapboxing for much longer. But I've just got a question from Amanda. Amanda, I think it's Fogarty. I think so. Amanda, could you just like pop the camera on and mic a sec? So I'm just trying to help answer that one. I'm hoping she's back. But she asks, I'm just trying to get the point. It says, if the class teacher engaged for a further 20 minutes that was not expected, how do your schools manage the impact on the other areas or children who have grasped the concept? So, I mean, the same day keep up happens in assembly. So, there is an impact. There's a trade-off in what you do. Right? So you've got to say, okay, at some point they're going to need more time. Right? So you can either take them with the subjects, make math longer, in which case you will have children sitting there learning, I think, because they'll be like, you'll suddenly got two groups of children, or you but really what they need is like, you know, more focused intervention, more focused support. So the loss is an assembly, and that's something fundamental. I get that at the end of the day, we're comfortable with, is that it's not ideal because they're learning. You've got to take time from somewhere. Like, it's a finite amount of time in primary school today. We are more comfortable with children missing an assembly than the alternative, which is kind of missing half their curriculum in year 6. Right? The other children in assembly, and for phonics, the other children are doing daily mile. What we have found, and I was going to talk about in the impact section, what I'll talk about now, is that it's, you know, the children who you were previously like boosting to death in year 5 and 6, they don't lose that same amount of time by doing this. Most children come to one same-day keeper, and you won't see them again that term, or you might see them again in a week's time. Some children might come 2-3 days in a row, right? If they come every day in a row, then it's not a same-day keeper they need. They need a much more a much more serious intervention. We have those as well. For those few, that small percentage, it needs something different. But for most children, missing the odd assembly to keep the gaps closed is a small price to pay, and it's not equivalent. So invest this short amount of time now, take a little, you know, sacrifice one assembly every couple of weeks maybe, and what you don't have to sacrifice is their entire history curriculum for year 6. And for, Lisa just asked about phonics. It's the same thing. So we teach reading separately to writing. So we teach reading for 40 minutes a day. So reading maybe phonics, and it's purely phonics to begin with, and obviously it becomes something on top of that. And we have daily mile every day. And so during the daily mile, those that need the phonics keep up have their keep up there. Same deal, because so the SLT support the daily mile, or the additional adult support the running the daily mile, and those children that need that extra phonics instruction receive it. Hopefully that makes sense. It's the same thing. I just kind of focus on maths today, but that's in the afternoon. It's the same thing. We do it twice a day, because both those subjects are like a hierarchical, aren't they? Not cumulative. Like, if you don't get today, you won't get tomorrow. So it's really important that you intervene in the right stage. Hopefully that kind of makes sense to people. I'm not pretending this is like a zero cost thing of doing sort of model. I'm saying it's a less costly model. And I can sit there and, yeah, and we'll talk about the impact at the end really, but I would say the impact on children's confidence, their knowledge, the impact on outcomes, the impact on their entitlement to the curriculum is a pretty decent trade-off for missing the odd assembly, you know, as far as I'm concerned. Right, I'm going to go back, share the screen, finish off, and then we'll sort of move on. So we have this like really sort of like forensic assessment. It's forensic sounding is, but what it's not, it's really effortful. Like, it's not like it takes massive amounts of effort. It's just quite forensic. It's not, we're not burning our teachers out. There's no marking after the lesson. The marking's done. Like, it's pro workload reduction. You know, I can't stand workload. I particularly can't stand people marking maths at home. Like, it's just at the point you need to be. And then I guess, and then what you're left with is 20 minutes. And the idea is, by the end of 20 minutes, this additional 20 minutes, you're taking this class of 30 children where, you know, where at the end of that hour, 27 were secure, and you're going to send them into the next day where 30 are secure and performing it. And it is an interesting thing. This almost always works, because you're teaching small, it's maths, like you're teaching small steps. So there won't be that much to unpick. And you'll already have started intervening with them at the point it started to show itself. And sometimes you've solved it before you even get to this. But we always use this time. So a couple of ways of using it. Number one, you may just need more time to work with that child, just, you know, to practice some examples with that child. You might have solved the problem in the lesson, but they never got to the independent practice, at which point they spend that time, this 20 minutes, doing the independent work. So you can assess that and make sure they're okay. If no one needs the intervention, which is really common, because they're not running around with big gaps all the time, then we use this time to support those children that could do with it on developing their sort of like the important facts knowledge, really. Like developing their sort of addition, subtraction facts, multiplication, division facts, and possibly some of the algorithms, you know, some of the key algorithms for addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Like you use it just to like improve the fluency for those that need it. There's always children that need to get better at the 7 times table. So we never don't use this. It's surprising 3 years on how often nobody needs this, needs to actually be instructed in this session. How often we now use it to work with children on some of their fluency. We never don't use it though. You always use it. Over time, and I'll finish probably by, over time, what we found is that the amount of children coming to intervention reduces, the frequency they come to intervention reduces, and we have to start really thinking about, like, what do you do when no one comes? Because you've got all the gaps are starting to close, aren't they? And so really, I would say, and we'll talk about this in a second, like within about 3 years, this intervention time becomes as much about practicing number facts as it does about intervention. As regards to planning for this intervention, we don't expect teachers to plan for it. We expect teachers to plan for the lesson. Okay, we put a lot of support in place. We do a lot of training around mathematics, and we expect teachers to be responsive to the needs of the pupils. And the question would be, what if someone doesn't get it? Like, what if, despite all this, they're not getting it? We have other room in the timetable that we will make if we need it that day. So we have, at the end of the day, we have our whole class reading, which is a ring fence 20 minutes, if necessary. And it really is rare that we will use that as a further extension. We're really unwilling to do that. So we sort of prize reading quite a lot, but 99% of the time this works. What if a child comes every day? They shouldn't be there. And we do have more intensive interventions. We use some of Engelman's work, sort of the really high level sort of DI stuff. What's it called? Connecting maths concepts. The really, really strong intervention. We use intensive interventions for those that need it. And if there are children that are coming every day, they shouldn't be in that maths lesson. In the same way that children who haven't got the phonics coach shouldn't be doing whole class reading lessons. So where we have children who aren't anywhere near where they should be, they are having a different mathematics lesson to begin with, because and it may be likely this 3 or 4% will never be at the expected standard, but there's no point like keeping them in there and just like keeping them busy for 6 years knowing they're not making any progress. We teach them what they need to know, we get them to where we can get them to. And the impact, I guess, is, I don't know. I mean, I imagine lots of people in this room with 90% expected standard going, well, why do I need this? The impact is, right, so we don't have revision in year 6, we have no boosters in year 6, we have no boosters in year 2. Children do the full curriculum every day throughout their journey in primary school. So there's no, they get a broad and balanced curriculum. We do 2 weeks of revision in mathematics in year 6, 2 weeks before the SATs, which is just really a necessary bit of test practice, really, so test strategy practice. But we teach the mathematics curriculum up to 2 weeks before the SATs. Outcomes are like 96 and I think 40 for greater depth. What do you want to call it? What do they call them now? Call it rapid. No, they call it now. High scores. I'm not really interested in that. But what I will say is that 90% that expected standard are genuine. Like they really can do maths. There's been no booster. They can really do maths. And what we also get, and after about 3 years of running it takes 3 years for it to rush to really sort of like become the thing it should be, is you get equity in year groups. So we have 90% at the end of year 6, we have 90% at the end of year 5, 90% at the end of year 4, 90% at the end of year 3. And that's unusual. And for those that, maybe wondering why bother. I mean, there's no reason. It depends what you're comfortable with, really, and what you think is appropriate. I believe this is the right way to teach. We believe this is the right way to teach children mathematics, and the best way to ensure they get a broad curriculum. And I can only tell you how terrifying it was when Mark McCall visited the school, because if anyone knows anything about maths, he does. And Mark McCall, as you probably know, spent a lot of time tweeting about this, and so it's got his seal of approval. But I'm not saying you should do it. I'm not saying that it's better than what you do in your schools. I'm saying it's something we did and we're doing for children that we serve and appears to be working. And so the point today was to ask you to think about something different to maybe what you do. So I hope in that sense, kind of it's been useful. And one question I think probably worth answering is that, was it impacted by COVID? Yes. because you're taking checking for understanding out of the equation. Like, it's really, really hard to check for understanding online. So is this a model for like an online world? Not really. I don't think any maths teachings, you're never going to get as good a maths teaching online as you would in person. So does it translate? It translates no better than anything else does. We still offer the catch up every day, but you just the level of assessment's not there. But for a sort of non-pandemic world, then it's proven to be really, really effective. And I think what Mark McCall took away is the confidence the children we serve have in mathematics, and we serve challenging demographics, that they enjoy maths, they believe in maths, they know they're supported, and by the end of year 6, or at any point in time, they know maths. And so that's my little talk. Hope you found it useful. I'll stop talking now, and I'll take any questions. You can just like unmic and pop the camera off if you've got any questions.
Yes, I've got a question. I'm not sure if I totally understand. I've got 2 hands up.
Right.
Yeah, my question was, I think I didn't understand, but am I right in saying that you do an hour of maths every morning when the children come in, and you do then the interventions during the assembly time, but then at another time you have another 20 minutes lesson?
So no. So there's 1 hour maths a day, and then in assembly, that's where we carve out that 20 minutes. Okay, so that's where the teachers don't go to assembly. They sit in the class, they stay in the classroom, and they deliver extra intervention. And so that's kind of the allocation for maths every day. Okay, and we have got, so I'm just going to expand timetable really quickly because it'll make more sense then. So our timetable is so it looks like this: maths for an hour, assembly, which is where the keep intervention is, reading for 40 minutes, play, writing for an hour, lunch, foundation lesson 1, daily mile, foundation lesson 2, whole class reading, class book. Does that make sense? So basically it's lesson something. I think it's discrete. Stop called bleeding between lessons. In the assembly after maths, we do same day keeper for maths. During the daily mile, we do same day keeper for phonics. So there's a delay between those. I don't think that's the end of the world. I think the point is it just has to be the same day. And during the whole class book at the end of the day, if on the odd chance someone needs longer, we'll put it in there. We'll work with them then. Does that make sense? That's really rare, actually, but I'm just saying there's always going to be someone who needs an extra 5 minutes. And if we can, we're always looking to like close the gap before the next day. That's what you're trying to do.
And my last question, because I'll let other people say, is just the logistics of it. When you're doing the assembly, it's for Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, yes?
Yeah, no, I mean, it depends on the school. So it depends on our schools, because some of them are big, and so they have separate assemblies. So you'd have slightly separate time sets. But yeah, we've got, depends on your level of additional adults reading and inside your school. But so in one school where we've got 2 teachers, one teacher will take all the children to assembly, and the other teacher will work with those from both classes till they return. So there's ways of working around it. Like in other schools, it's down to TAs to move them, and the leaders will support with that. How you do it, and you do need the behaviour to be in place. Like we've got.
We've got good behaviour, but I'm thinking the logistics of the playtime, because I was actually thinking after assembly playtime.
I think so. What do you want to be taught? What matters? What matters? You do the same day. Is you do it the same day. How you do it, you don't have to do it a week. I mean, that's not doing all there really. Like for us, that works. Assembly's a really good time to do it. It comes straight after maths. It's quite nice. Then they've got reading. Then they've got break. It's just it flows really nicely for maths. But it doesn't matter if you do it during assembly, which is the end of the day, or during something else. And that's the decision for people to make. Really, I say what I think is important is that some extra time is offered for those 2 core areas of like phonics, code, and mathematics in the day that we know children will need. And then what we don't do, and so what I haven't said as a trust is forget maths, as a trust, our reading, I think, is progression-wise is the strongest in the country. It is really strong. And because we teach phonics, and we have this intervention, so we make sure everybody is fluent in the code, right? So, but I was going to talk about maths today because that's what I did. But so I'd say like it doesn't really matter like how you state the data. It doesn't bother. There's none there really. Like, but what to be tight about, what matters is like you have the same day keep up and the teacher leads it. That's what's important.
Yes.
No having an additional adult lead it. Like the least expert, the most expert person should be helping the person with the least expertise.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I totally agree.
I can't like. I can just say like. It actually isn't that big a push to make it work. So I've made it work in loads of schools, and they've all got it slightly different. Like some have got it straight after, some have got it different times. In some, it's like one teacher takes them and the other teacher leads both classes. I don't think that really matters. If you're going to come down to it, like, so what? Like, but are you making sure they get enough time to understand stuff? That's the question I think you need to answer. So it's like what that's all that matters really. How you make it work. If you want to try it, it's kind of down to your setting. The key thing is the teacher leads it and they get some extra time every day. Like what that cost is, what your trade-off is up to you. For us, assembly seems quite a cheap trade-off.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a place where you can take the whole school and stick them in there while the other people are doing stuff. Like, yeah, the teachers don't need to sit in assembly. There's the value in that. Like, they're not teaching at that point. Rather they teach while you're doing the assembly. That's what we kind of found. Is that useful?
Interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm mindful it's 11:20 and I've been rabbiting on for ages. But thanks, Sam. That's a really good question. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, we've got a question. You talked about how the children that are always the consistent low attainers, the children that are like below on the year below's curriculum or whatever, having completely different lessons, and we just wondered how you go about doing that really. With your
so I mean there aren't many. So what I would say is like schools often misdiagnose how many children really can't do maths, right? So because what they're doing is like just looking at people with massive gaps. So I want to say 3 years on, that's very few people, like 2 or 3 kids in a supplementary school, and not 22 children, like as it appears to be. What you'll find if you take this approach is actually stick with it, and those children that look like they can't do maths, you start to unpick things, and they soon can. But for 2 or 3, we use because a teacher won't lead that because we won't have an extra teacher to do that lesson, right? So we use the supporting adults, and we use what's called. So for that, you want to. Because that's going to be down to expertise, you need to use something that's really good. So we use like direct instruction sort of scheme called connecting maths concepts. Okay, so I don't know how much people don't know about direct instruction, but basically like a scripted like maths scheme. But it's by Engelman, who is like the master of doing this. They're beautiful lessons, beautiful like units. They're fully sort of interleaved. They're really intelligent stuff like. And you can give it to someone to do. That's the point, right? Like, but it's got to be high quality. Like, it's got to be like if you're doing intervention, then the only way I feel that I can quality assure the quality of that is to make sure I know what's being said. And so, connecting maths concepts is probably the most. I would recommend that. It's quite expensive.
Can you say that again?
Connecting maths concepts. Okay. And it's like direct instruction, which is basically like it's like a scripted. Sort of interleaved approach to maths. Like you can check it on Amazon, it's quite expensive, but when you look at maths interventions, or you might have a local one's really good, but this is really good because I know it is, right? Like it's the most proven intervention in mathematics in the world. Like it's where the research all sits behind this one as being like really impactful. So I'm comfortable with our additional adults. We're comfortable with additional adults delivering it. We also train them. We don't just give them it and go read that. But that's what you have to do. And if our children don't make the expected standard by the end of year 6, but they're a bit better at maths than they were when we started doing intervention, that's progress, isn't it? What's not progress is sticking them in a room when they don't get stuff every day, and then sticking them in its own intervention when you're unpicking the wrong problem. Like, but what I would say is, my feeling is that like what we understand as being children that can't do maths, and actually the children that can't do maths is quite a different group. Like really, we've seen now 3 years on, we are talking about 3-4 children in a 2-point school, not 7 children in every classroom, which is just not true. They just got to, the gaps just have started to form, and then they get more significant as they move on, and they get more significant, and then we start thinking they got SEM because they're stuck on something we never unpicked them in year 3, like and so it's interesting. You get a lot of people get less intervention, really. So hopefully that's kind of useful. I hope that was a good answer. One answer. Anyway.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, Abby, thank you. Any other questions at all, guys?
I've got a question. So when it comes to obviously your differentiation within the class, I mean, is that still looking the same, or because obviously if we're talking about giving them time to practice more of the same, are you still the majority doing the same thing, and you're giving some, like, you're obviously moving children on when they've shown they can practice? Like, how does that work?
You're moving together. You're moving together. It doesn't matter how. So one thing I would say, what I'm pretty touched upon is, like, so, you know, like, we've got 40% of grade, like, whatever it's called, grade them, like, whatever that's called now. Like, so our lessons begin with, like, the new learning concept. We teach that until everybody can do it, right? And then we take them, we look at some other applications of it, then we take them deeper. So it's not the lesson ends at the point of, like, so there's lots and lots of depth in there. But practice is really important, right? So it does mean sometimes that the really fast graspers have finished first, and they might have to wait for a second. But it doesn't matter, like, they can wait for a second, you know. And what we often use, and there's a lot of evidence supporting this, is and it is worth thinking about, is you plan your route, your marking route, based on like getting to them guys first, right? So you get to the people who are the fast graspers first. But practice is important. Forget, like, Federer practices. Doesn't matter how good you are, practice until you can't get it wrong is the thing to do. And, like, overlearning is a thing. Like, if Federer stopped practicing his serve, after a couple of years, it will get worse. Like, it's the same with these children. They might, and you've got to remember, it's always performance, isn't it? Like, you're only ever looking at performance in the classroom, not knowledge. But what we would do, so now you've got a class of 30 kids, we'd hit the fastest graspers first in the marking, right? Because they'll be done in the first 5 minutes, won't they? And then you use peer-to-peer tutoring. So you then get them to go, while you're doing everybody else, get them to go and work with the kids that are stuck. Like, all the evidence around collaborative learning says the most effective collaborative learning is peer-to-peer tutoring, and peer-to-peer tutoring is more effective than teacher-to-child tutoring. So what we'll do with our fastest graspers, which we don't set out as being any group, whoever it is that day, is they'll go and sit and work with the people who are struggling for a bit, and it's usually pretty effective, to be honest. But we don't really concern ourselves with, like, no, we don't send them off to do something else, because that's really confusing. So you stop to teach 3 lessons. Like, it's a bit more meaningful use of their time for them to go in, okay, well done, you've really nailed that. There's 20 examples. Could you go and sit with Thingy and give them and have them explain to you what they're doing? That's way more impactful. Like, they're having to unpick someone else's understanding and help them. And there's something about, like, peer-to-peer tutoring in that, and why it's effective. They're not sure why it is more effective often than teachers, but they believe it's because they speak in kind of similar language and they're developmentally in the same place. So, like, it just seems to be really effective. So no, we don't ever have all the kids in different places. Like,
okay.
Sense, kind of.
Yeah, because I just wanted to see, obviously, hearing what you're saying about, like, everyone coming on that journey with you. Yeah. That's what I was just wondering. Obviously, we know with this how you support the children that need more help. We'll be doing the intervention, but with your more able children, kind of how that would look, obviously, if they're
what I'd say is, like, generally this approach means you can go deep with all the kids more often. Like, every lesson we go quite deep, way beyond the new learning, right? And that's hard to show you because I'm talking about something in particular here, but I know that we've got 40% working in high schools across them. So, like, we're not kind of not doing that. It's just a case I'm trying to focus on the session. But so we move them together. And then when we mark them all, and 80% are doing really successfully, we move the whole class on to, like, a more sophisticated look at that.
Yeah.
And then, at any point everyone's really quick. We just get them to work with the people who are, like, taking longer, because that's really, there's lots of evidence to say that should work and it does work. Hope that's useful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm mindful it is 11:27. I'll probably got time for one more question if anyone's got one, but otherwise, I hope it's kind of useful. Okay, I think I might have answered most questions. Sorry, I missed which school. Which are you in? It's definitely possible to visit. I'm not at school. I'm in a teaching hub now, but I'm still connected to the schools that started doing this. So Hawks Farm Academy in East Sussex, Burfield Academy in East Sussex, White House Academy in East Sussex, Phoenix Academy in East Sussex. But for now, just think Hawks Farm Academy. That's what we want to look at. That's where Mark came. That's where this all started, so please feel free to, like, get in touch, and we've got a load of visits, like, next week. I think we've got, like, 20 schools coming next week to have a look.
Can you say the school again, because I didn't catch
Hawk Farm. I'll pop in the chat for you.
Please, yeah.
Hawk Farm. There's 6 schools. I was going to give you the biggest one because it's easy to accommodate people. There you go. It's that one.
Thank you.
And I think with this, you need to see it. I'm going to talk about it all day long, but it's when you see it, like, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Like, it makes more sense when you see it, and you see kids like just like getting stuff. It's nice. Okay. Hope it was useful. I'm not telling you what anyone else is doing is wrong. I'm just saying this is what we're doing. I kind of half believe is like, you know, it's hard in the right place, you know. It's not, I think. Anyway, that's me. I'll stay on the line if you've got any questions, but otherwise, I think do I hand over to you now, Rebecca? I don't even know what I do now, but
thank you, Matt. So I just wanted to say a big thank you. It was a really brilliant session, and we're getting some really lovely messages in the chat. I've also put the feedback form into the chat as well, so if you have a moment, could you please complete that? And I'll be in touch with you all in the next day or two to repost the feedback form and to share Matt's slides.